Jed York. Here's the interesting thing about Jed York. I actually had a topic at some point this season giving him a lot of credit for the way that he's turned the team around compared to some of the early years, and then to bounce back after the Harbaugh years. I think he did deserve credit for those things. Yes, the ultimate goal is to win a Super Bowl, but it's not that I think York is doing an awful job or is an awful owner even. I like York up until the point that he opens his mouth. It seems like every time he has something to say, he just insert foot in mouth. And today, he couldn't help himself. There was at least 3 separate occasions that he took a shot at Eddie DeBartolo. And for what? Because he was trying to protect the fact that they didn't win a Super Bowl. Every time it got tough or the heat was turned up on them not winning a Super Bowl, he'd go right back to taking a shot at DeBartolo. So one of the things
I saw your tweet about that, Jesse. Sorry to cut you off. What did you think were the shots he was taking?
So one of them was they asked him about how DeBartolo would get fired up and hit a wall or something after they lost a big game. He's like, well, I could do those things, but it's really about being mature in those situations. I mean, what am I going to do to control or impact the game? I've got to be more calculated and mature. I'm like, okay, maybe that's a little shot. But when he said, well, it's not like when my uncle was the owner of this team and we could just pay whoever, whatever we wanted. I mean, if it was up to me, we would have just kept Eric Armstead and paid him whatever he wants. If we weren't in the salary cap era, I would have already paid Brandon Ayuk. If I could have had the 2 highest paid quarterbacks on the roster, you don't think I would do those things? Like, okay, dude, that's completely unnecessary. Why even bring that up? Basically saying, the way I took that was, basically what you're saying is his championships don't amount to anything because they could just spend whatever they want. And who cares about the culture? Who cares about the actual drafting of the great players that they did? None of that mattered. It's because they could spend whatever they want. So essentially, what I'm doing is really hard. You should give me the grace. I didn't like that at all.
Yeah, I mean, one, he didn't use the tone of voice that you were saying all of those things, so that's a little
well,
bit.
Of course not, but
he was also asked. It was a question that was asked, and he gave an answer. And yeah, but I mean, I think that I didn't take it that way. I actually saw your tweet and then watched the video, so I was looking from the perspective of what your tweet was to see, like, okay, where did he take these shots? And then I saw him talking about DeBartolo, but I do think that I thought he was answering a question, and what his point was is that the NFL is different now than it was then. So the business is different now than it was then. So, like, I don't know. I didn't really take it as shots at DeBartolo, but yeah, man, I get it. Like, I don't think his messaging was great from a fan's perspective. Like, I think that, no fan wants to hear that, hey, we had a successful year and we, lost the Super Bowl, or, no fans want to hear about, what's it called, moral victories and all this type of stuff, right? Which is kind of the sentiment that York was putting in. But yeah, ultimately why I think it's fine right now is just because I think he has the right pieces in place. I know people argue with me on that, but I think Kyle Shanahan is the right coach. And ultimately, I do think they get over the hump, with who they have in place right now.
Well, and one of the things that I gave him credit for mid-season, it might have been a show with you, Sunil, but I said something along the lines of, I like that for the most part, you don't hear from York. He's hired football guys. Whether you agree if they're the right guys or not, that's kind of irrelevant. But he's chosen his football guys, Shanahan, Lynch, and he stayed out of their way for the most part, allowed them to make the decisions. And I love it when owners do that. I hate when owners think they're the football guys and then they start making decisions. You look at the Panthers as a great example. Jerry Jones, yes. He's actually done a pretty decent job. But yes, he's like the main example. But the Panthers, you look at their situation, they brought in Young to be their quarterback because the owner wanted him. But rumors came out that the coach that they had hired that same offseason wanted CJ Stroud. They end up firing him mid-season, essentially, because you didn't see eye to eye on the quarterback, and ultimately you probably did take the wrong quarterback. How is that the coach's fault? So anyways, I like that he stays out of the way of the football guys and allows them to make their decisions. And I'm not saying, hey, we shouldn't ever hear from the owner, especially at things like this. This is the owner's meeting. I get it. Dude, just be a little bit more cognizant on the tone. Read the tone of the room, read the room, know what the expectations are. And I did. I love the fact that Grant started that whole thing with a home run question, which was, you said years ago that you are here to win Super Bowls. And if you don't, basically it's a failure and to hold you accountable. Yet this year you talked about how it was still a successful season, even if you lost in the NFC Championship game. Has your expectations changed? And I think York gave a good answer. I mean, he's matured. Things have changed. I get all of that. But some of it was just, I don't know. I took it as shots at DeBartolo. I know maybe you didn't or some other people didn't. That's how I took a lot of the things that he said. But maybe I just read into it differently.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, well, not the biggest, but one of the bigger things that I took from it was understanding, because I think what the point he was trying to make is that, like, the difference between where this is the kind of the most interesting thing to me is, like, he believes that the 49ers would be considered a dynasty if they had the right quarterback. That was the biggest thing, because he talked about, the dynasties have Mahomes, have Tom Brady. But then he was like, I don't know if Brock Purdy's ever going to be as good as those guys. That was kind of interesting because, obviously, then he talked about paying this guy and how he understood he's going to pay them, $40-50 million. Well, if you want to create a dynasty and you need the right quarterback to be able to do that, then, do you stick with Purdy or do you try to keep searching for that right guy? I don't know. So that's kind of interesting because it does seem like he understands that the business is different from the years that the 49, because I guess what the ultimate point that I think he was making was, like, back in the day with his uncle, like, you wouldn't lose a guy because you couldn't pay him. You would choose if you want to keep this guy or not. Whereas now you have to make tougher decisions as far as roster building. You can't just keep all the guys, even if you know that they're an asset or not, right? And that is accurate. Like, I don't think you can argue that. But once again, I just think ultimately his messaging was wrong because he let fans that believe that he's not Super Bowl or bust continue to believe that he's not Super Bowl or bust, which I think ultimately he'll get criticism until they win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, absolutely. But see, here's the other thing, and this is why I look at it as taking shots at DeBartolo, maybe in some of the scenarios that you don't. I can't get that quote out of my head from a year ago where the guys from the front office essentially called the old way of running things, they called them a lemonade stand. They've taken shots before, and they all fall under York's ownership. So I imagine that if somebody in the front office speaks that way, that Jed York backs that up. So for me to hear this again, I said, you're doing it again, Jed. You're a little bit bitter that you don't have your ring. Everybody looks at the gold standard as being before you got here. You have an ego. I think that plays a little bit in these press conferences. I do.